Hello, let's talk about Ulysses. As you will have already seen by the title, but I am just launching into, this is a reading vlog of me reading Ulysses by James Joyce, except I'm not reading it, I'm listening to it with the Audrey app. Honestly, this feels like an ad, it sounds like an ad, it's not an ad. They gifted me a copy, but you will know if you've been around here for a while that I have used Audrey before. I listened to Dracula on Audrey and it was fantastic. The performances were fantastic, but the unique thing about Audrey, as opposed to other audiobooks, is they curate the context around the book as well. So it's not just the book, it's somebody providing context around it. There's in between each chapter, there's a pause so that you can put context into the chapter that you've just read a little bit around the chapter, maybe ask some questions about what happened in the chapter that helps guide you in a critical thinking way rather than just letting the story wash over you. And I really enjoy that. It makes the reading experience a bit more, not interactive, but a bit deeper than otherwise. And of course you can just listen to the story and that's fine. The performances are amazing, like I said. But this just brings a little bit something extra. Now, I have Ulysses on my shelf already. I've tried to read it already. I'm up to page 58 of 933 pages in this Penguin Classics edition of Ulysses. And I just bounced off it. I have the Kindle version because it's on Kindle Unlimited for free. I have a different audio version that I bought off Libro FM. I just keep bouncing off this book and I want to say that I have read it. Not so much reading it, but I want to say I have read Ulysses. Tick that off the list. Don't think about it again. So I'm going to try with the audio version. I have been really excited for this. As soon as I heard that they were launching it, I was like, this is going to be the one that gets me through. They sent me a copy for review because I put my hand up and said, yes, I was buying it anyway. I would love to do this. And hence, reading vlog. Now, let me tell you what I know about Ulysses so far. It's written by James Joyce. It was published in 1922. Oh, the little bio blurb in the front says, it was in fact published on his birthday in Paris in 1922. Joyce is from Ireland originally, and I don't know if he was exiled or exiled himself to France for a long time. And he was part of that modernist literature movement that includes Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot and Catherine Mansfield, and they're the only ones that I've read. Actually, I haven't read Virginia Woolf yet, but I have Virginia Woolf. I have Mrs. Dalloway on Audrey as well to be going on with. The Audrey version of Ulysses comes in at 27 hours and 19 minutes, so that should keep me going for a while. But, and through the magic of editing, you're going to see this on the screen now, there is a calendar of a breakdown of how to get through the reading. So I think we start on the 16th, which is Bloomsday, which is apparently the day this book is set. It is set over the course of a day, I am led to believe, and that is June 16, which is tomorrow for me. And then read a chapter every day or every couple of days. Some chapters they've got spread over 2 days. For example, chapter 6 is spread over the 22nd and 23rd of June. And then into July. By the end of July, I should be done with some gaps in there. Like chapter 18, the last chapter, spans over 3 days. So that's a thing. That's wow. We will see. So with the guide for reading and the gaps for catching up, I'm hopeful to complete it in the time frame. But we will see. I will check in with you periodically to tell you how I'm going. But I'm super excited. Apart from that, that's all I know about Ulysses. I've read the first chapter once. I've listened to it once. And of course I know like the famous culmination, literally, which is printed here on the front cover as well. Yes, I said yes, I will, yes. Which is pretty powerful. So, of course, this will all be wrapped up by the time that you see this video, but you can go and get Ulysses anytime and follow the calendar and get through it yourself. Or let me know if you've read it before. Now, initially I was reading this at the behest of perpetual influencer, Luke, who was really keen to reread Ulysses and keen for me to read Ulysses. In fact, he sent me this, which is Ulysses Unbound, a reader's companion to James Joyce's Ulysses by Terence Killeen, which I haven't looked at yet either because I didn't want spoilers. I just want it to wash over me. And I guess this goes through the chapters. Let me compare and contrast while we're sitting here together. My version doesn't have those chapters. Interesting and annoying. So that's broken down into each of the 18 chapters. So you can see there's like between 10 and 20 pages per chapter. So that feels like homework. And maybe I won't, but maybe I'll try if I'm to stick to the time frame. So that feels like enough preamble waffle, and let's get into it. Let's read Ulysses. This is the face of somebody who's been at work all day, and consequently it's nighttime and I've got the light on rather than sun. So anyway, let's talk about Ulysses while I'm waiting for dinner to cook. I have listened to 3 chapters now. The first one, they don't have chapter names, but because they're based on the Odyssey, scholars have broken them up into parts of the Odyssey. So the first part is called the Telemachus, which consists of Telemachus, chapter 1, Nestor, chapter 2, and Proteus, chapter 3. They correspond to parts of the Odyssey, characters of the Odyssey. The first part starts out with, actually all 3 of these focus on one character called Stephen Daedalus, and he is an insular character, and in the style of modernism you get to his interiority, and that gets increased the further it goes on. So the first chapter is Stephen interacting with his flatmates and a house guest who he's pissed is staying there, but by the end of the chapter he capitulates and, you know, lets him stay on further, even though he really doesn't want this guy to stay. That's just who Stephen is. He just capitulates for the sake of avoiding conflict, I reckon. And then the second one, he goes to work. He's a teacher. Even though he'd like to be a writer, he's got to pay the bills. So he's teaching and he just has no control over his students and no power in the dynamic with his boss either, who everything said, you know, this is super anti-Semitic. Obviously this language is not appropriate in the modern time, but I think it is appropriate in the story. It is severely anti-Semitic, but it is, and it's overt for the time. The book is set in 1904, but at the same time I don't find it unsurprising or overwhelming. It feels like something that you would hear people say today. I have customers who say very similar things about different groups of people, at least on a weekly basis. So it wasn't shocking to me. It's not hurtful to me because I'm not Jewish, and so I'm comfortable with that. But there were trigger warnings for that everywhere, or content warnings, I should say. And then the third chapter that I listened to, which is called Nestor, is Stephen. After he finishes work, he goes for a walk along the beach, and it's mainly his interior monologue and the way that the things that he sees affects his thoughts, and the way that his thoughts are affecting the things that he sees. He sees 2 women and he makes up a story about them, like we would, I suppose. Often you might see a couple and try and imagine what they're doing there, what they do, how they come to be here. And that's very interior with a few patches of narration, like external narration as well. And I think that chapter in particular would be a challenge to read. But that reminds me, in the introduction by Sophie Corsa, I think Sophie Corsa has written the introduction and the context, doing all the context things on the Audrey app. She says straight up, if you're not vibing with a chapter, just skip it. Like, it's not so vital to understanding the story, because it's highly unlikely you will understand the story on your first pass anyway. Scholars have been studying this for 100 years. and there is no definitive answer of what's going on. That it's not a big deal if you skip a part that you're really not vibing with. And I expect this Nesta chapter, there's a lot of imagery and Stephen's interiority, and it was easy to listen to because it just kind of wafted over me, but to read it I think would be a struggle, even though in reading it you would get the punctuation or lack of punctuation that denotes the thoughts and then the narration. So overall, I'm having fun so far. The first 3 chapters makes up the first part where it's normally broken up. So now I'm about to start part 2, which is called Calypso. Another thing which is super handy about Audrey in particular is I can go into, so this is the app, I'm up to Calypso. Down the bottom it says recaps, and then it's got a recap of everything that has happened in each chapter so far. So I'll just read you the first one. Skip the next minute or so if you don't want spoilers. The first recap says, 8 a.m, Buck Mulligan, Stephen Dedalus, and an English gentleman called Haynes are all staying in our Martello Tower at Sandy Cove, South Dublin, Ireland. The 3 young men start the 16th of June 1904 by having breakfast together before walking the short distance to the 40-foot swimming spot. Buck swims and Haynes will later, but Stephen refuses. So I really like that too, because if it's a big book or you take a break for any reason from the audio, when you come back you've got this little recap to catch you up. There's also a characters screen as well. So if I click on Stephen Dedalus, it tells me what I know about this character so far. So it says he's a young writer, he's renting the Martello Tower, he is teaching at a school, I'm skipping the spoilers, that sort of thing. So that's just super handy. And then you've always got access to the guide as well. It's just providing context. So again, for that first chapter, if I scroll all the way back, the guide here is so good. There is so much in it. So I'll just read something from the introduction, like before you even start reading the book. There's this. This is a big, strange book, and there's lots of support out there to help readers. In addition to the notes and suggestions here on the app, I will point out a few handy websites, and there's links to those, and then links to the Homer stuff, links with the content warning. It does say Ulysses was banned, and I remember hearing that, and I had forgotten that it was banned on publication in the US and the UK and other places. It says, it's remarkable how sexually explicit it is given when it was written, and it still does have the ability to shock. You get more warnings as you go through, but there's definitely still some not safe for work scenes. Headphones recommended. It made me laugh, I'll put it that way. So that's my waffle. I'm sure my dinner is cooked. I will check in with you when I've read some more. I am 1000% sure that I was wearing this exact outfit in the last clip, but it's just what I put on when I get home from work, which I have literally just done. I'm about to prepare dinner. I actually have like 3 minutes to myself, which never happens after work. So I'm going to use it to talk to you about Ulysses. Now, it has been a week. It's been such a week. And my fatigue levels are such that I have been struggling to words and to communicate effectively with, people, which customer service is my job. So it's been a struggle, but I did listen to one more chapter of Ulysses. I listened to, I'm just going to get the app and tell you what I listened to, because it was at the start of the week. It was probably literally after I filmed the last clip, which was days and days ago. So I listened to chapter 4, which is called Calypso. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I said the chapters don't have these official names. This is just the correlations with the Odyssey. So Calypso is a person or a chapter or a part of the Odyssey. In this one, we finally meet, after the first 3 chapters, after the first whole section, we meet the main character, and this is Leopold Bloom. God, I did have to stop and think about that. Leopold Bloom, Bloom's Day, the 16th of June, is named after him, and you don't meet him until ages into the book. So we meet Bloom, and just like especially that last chapter with Stephen Dedalus, it is very thoughts influenced by what is happening in his world. Leopold Bloom is in his late 30s. I'm going to say he has a 15-year-old daughter. He's married. His missus got a suspicious letter, which, you know, could be leading to something extramarital later in the book. This also was a chapter, even though it was an interior, like, thoughts chapter, it's contrasted with Daedalus in that it's very physical. Daedalus was very thoughts, abstract, making those sorts of connections. Bloom is, I'm hungry, I want to have a kidney, goes to the butcher and buys a kidney for breakfast, comes home, eats, we've got the flavours of the kidney, and then he needs to go to the loo. So then we follow him to the loo, and literally the procedure and the physical bodily feeling of doing a poo is described in this chapter. I was so uncomfortable, and it made me think that that's maybe why I don't like romance. Yeah, bear with me. I don't mind romance when it's all not abstract, but, you know, there's feels and maybe there's like the tension before the first kiss, especially YA romance. And then, you know, if there's sex, I don't really want to read about it. I'm happy for it to happen in the story, but I'd prefer it to be off screen, or, you know, a fade to black situation. I don't need to read the gritty details of, as my teenage boyfriend used to call it, the purple-headed warrior. And maybe that's because I'm uncomfortable with that physical descriptions, and because I was not comfortable with Leopold Bloom either, in the way that he was just physically in the world. So there's that. Also, I struggle with visualization in novels. Like, you might have seen that meme, not a meme, but that image, and I will put it up here if you haven't seen it, of the 5 broad categories of visualization. And like number 5, the best one is like a fully formed apple in color with this little sheen on it, and then down the other end is like nothing, and then in between you've got like the outline of the apple and variously shaded. And I am more towards the nothing end in a visualization when I read, and so something that's physical requires that visualization, I think, or for me it does. And so a lot of it I can't, and so it's just got to wash over me. So that's a benefit to listening, because when it's not something that I can picture, I don't get bogged down in trying to picture it and failing. It moves on without me, whether I'm coming or not. So that's an interesting revelation to me as a reader. I knew about the visualization thing, obviously, but in terms of physicality in stories, that's new and interesting. What's interesting to me. So I'm here yammering and not actually working on preparing this dinner. Dinner this evening is pizza, so I'm just prepping the ingredients before everyone gets home. I like to have all the toppings on my pizza, so I'm just chopping up some mushrooms. Anyway, we have that with Leopold. The recap says all those things that I just said about who Bloom is and his wife and his daughter, and so that's where I'm at. If I don't listen to a chapter today, and that depends on many things, including when my kid finishes work and I have to go and get her, I'm gonna try and do a chapter today or multiple chapters over the weekend. I am working on the weekend, but I could probably get 2 or 3 done on Sunday, and that would put me ahead again. Listening on a time frame, on a timeline, is difficult, because just this week it's been, especially come home, by the time I've cooked dinner and done the dishes, talked to my kid for what feels like only 5 minutes, it is literally time for bed. So my point, Jesus Christ, my point is that listening on this timeline could be stressful, except I'm not going to be stressed out because I prefer to binge anyway. So I want to be listening to each chapter in a chunk, and I think that's going to be a Sunday project. I might get 3 or 4 listened to while I am doing other things. This is why I film in the morning, so I don't have all this tired waffle going on. So I will finish making my pizza toppings, and I will check back in when I have read/listened to some more. All right, we should check in about Ulysses. It's actually been well over a week since I recorded that last clip, and so I have a few chapters that I've gotten through since then. That's the front of the book, so I am just under 40% of the way through the audiobook, but I've run into some chapters where you really have to read along with the audio. Correspondingly, I'm about halfway through the How to Ulysses book. And so far, I made a comment last night that every new chapter I get to is longer than the previous chapter. I'm beginning to feel like it's, one of those like pyramid scam things where you think you're getting short digestible chunks and then it just gets bigger and bigger and overwhelming and you're like, what have I done? But I'm nearly halfway through. I'm making this vlog, like I can't not. So we press on. And of course I was warned that this would happen in Ulysses. Some chapters are just a lot harder than others. One thing that I highlighted from this was that Ulysses doesn't set out to make any sense. And so finding sense in there is difficult. Finding meaning is different from finding sense. And not all of it is sensical. Right, so I think we talked about the chapter Calypso where we meet Leopold Bloom and he goes for a poo at the end of it. The next chapter was actually my favourite so far, one of my favourites so far, and that is Lotus Eaters. And we go with Bloom to a funeral of a friend of his. He meets up with other men of a similar age and they all go in the carriage together behind the coffin over to the funeral. And so it's a chapter, and then they spend time like in the churchyard. It's a chapter where Bloom internally is musing on death, musing on the death of his own child, the suicide of his father, but also on death culture at the same time as people they pass in the street, all the men are commenting on and just having a regular gossipy conversation. And I really enjoyed that because it's the juxtaposition of death and life. And I'm very interested in death culture, especially my culture, which is British. So that's part of my death culture. And that was absolutely fascinating to me. Just the internal reflections on death and the death of people close to you, what that means, how that impacted their life, how they, like, Bloom was a different person when his son died to now, which is, I think, 15 years later, just under. So I really enjoyed that one. And then, that one was Hades. What was Lotus Eaters about then? I mean, that makes sense. Lotus Eaters. Let's read the little catch up on the app. Oh, that's right. He Bloom's wandering about the town in the hour before the funeral and collects a letter from the post office indicating that he started like a text letter writing affair with some mystery lady, even though they haven't met in real life. So there's that going on. And then the Hades chapter, which is the one with the funeral. And then it is midday and Bloom goes into the newspaper offices where he works as like an advertising canvasser. So he talks to people to get them to put ads in the paper, and then he goes to the paper and says, we're doing this. Do you agree? The editor comes back and says yes, but, or no, and Bloom goes off and tries to get the ads, like gets people to pay for ads in the paper. This one was really interesting, not for the content of the chapter, but the style of the chapter, because it's interspersed with crossheads, like in a newspaper, that indicate what's about to happen. So it starts, and they get sillier as they go on. It starts out with things like, we see the canvasser at work. Just take my post-it out. So, like, it's all the same flow, but it's got the crosshead in there. But then they get sillier. So there's one later on that's like, a collision ensues. And literally the next line, Bloom came in and bumped against someone. Like, a collision does ensue. And then they get full on silly. The last one is diminished digits prove too titillating for frisky frums and wimbles play wangles. Yet, can you blame them? I really enjoyed about this chapter too. Not so much, like I said, the content, but the narration of those crossheads in, turn of the century newspaper newsreader style was one of the the benefits of listening rather than reading. Then Bloom goes looking for some lunch, and on the way he runs into an acquaintance who tells him about a mutual friend of theirs who's been in labour for 3 days. So then Bloom has some musings on pregnancy and childbirth and women's lot in having to go through this, and of course contrasting with the death chapter and then the death of his son and all those things. Again, I found that interesting. Maybe just as somebody who's, had children. But yeah, anyway, after that, he goes to find some lunch, and the restaurant that he wanted to eat in, it absolutely repulses him when he walks in. And you can feel it. It's like visceral, the description of it. So then he ends up having a cheese sandwich at the pub, which just made me laugh, actually. A cheese sandwich at the pub. I was going to say, up until yesterday, this was the hardest chapter that I've come across. It's called Scylla and Charybdis, and they're in it, the Odyssey. They're two monsters. One of them is like a scary whirlpool monster, and one of them is like a 6-headed creature that eats people and ships. Odysseus has to choose which of these two evils to contend with because he can't avoid them. But the chapter itself is Stephen Dedalus, who we met in the first section, having a literary conversation in the National Library about Shakespeare and about Hamlet in particular. And I think the crux, according to this, the crux is Stephen's trying to find a father figure because his father's not cutting it. And his mum's just died. So it's about that. But it's just a bunch of literary people wank about the theories behind a piece of writing. And I followed it because I've done enough learning about literary criticism and interpretation to understand where these thoughts are coming from. There's a lot of discussion about the author insertion in a text and who is Shakespeare, the person in each of his plays and poems and the sonnets. And that's also a commentary on the character of Stephen Dedalus, who is an insertion of Joyce as a young man. But then there's also, does the author even matter in the text, which by the 20s when this book was published was a real turning point in literary criticism theory. Like, does the author actually even matter in the text? And that's where the term death of the author comes from, does our interpretation and understanding of a text, does the author and their intention actually mean anything in our interpretation of a text? And then there's a lot of misogyny against Shakespeare's wife, which is to be expected. So it was a hard chapter. I followed it because I'm familiar with literary theory. I'm familiar with Hamlet and Shakespeare in general, but it was a bit meh. But this chapter was also interesting in the style because previously we've had a separation of the narration and the internal thoughts of a character. But this chapter, even though it's externally narrated, is narrated in the style of Stephen's thoughts. And so the distinction between the narrator and the narrated is becoming blurred. Like each of these chapters is a different style and just playing with the form and trying unexpected things. This one definitely blurred those lines in a way that we are familiar with today. But of course, modernism is the mode of writing that changed all this. Just like if you were only listening, you wouldn't realise that. Find a page. I hope that shows up clearly on the camera. All these M dashes are indicative of speech. There's no quotation marks. And so you'll have something that's indicative of speech, and then the sentence will just carry on with no punctuation to indicate that the speaker has finished speaking. That's a feature of modernism as well. I understand this isn't the most compelling reading vlog because I haven't actually been reading. I've just been telling you about it. It's the nature of the way that I've been able to read. So I'm just trying to do one chapter at night after work and then hopefully finish by my self-imposed bedtime. Chapter after that is called Wandering Rocks, and it's broken into, says here, 19 different sections, and it's a little vignette of people moving about the city. We have Leopold Bloom buying his wife a gift, even though he knows that later in the afternoon she's be having a rendezvous with Blazes Boylan, and he's trying not to think about that. In fact, I did read something, I think in one of these recaps, contextual things by Sophie Corsa, about how the entire book is Bloom's avoidance of thinking about Molly and Boylan. So anyway, Bloom buys Molly a gift. Other people move about the town. There's Stephen Dedalus, his sisters, his dad, all moving in different places, and other characters too. And you get a bit of a glimpse of an hour in the city of Dublin with all these characters, and how some characters will spy other ones, like across the way, or the way that their movements intersperse. That was the closest to a straightforward narrative that this book has accomplished so far. That one was an easy chapter to listen to. Then we have the hardest chapter that I've come across so far, and I don't know if it is the hardest. Definitely the chapter about Hamlet. The notes that Sophie Corsa made in preparation for the chapter says, you can skip this one. It is a hard chapter. But I found this one harder. I actually had to read it along with the listening because it was definitely a chapter to be read aloud. It's a musical style, and there's a lot of wordplay and homonyms, wordplay, but I couldn't follow it just by listening because of the homonyms, the similar sounds, and trying to do clever things with that. It was a read and listen at the same time, which I do not enjoy doing. I avoid it. There's a reason I'm listening, not reading. But this one was a read and listen at the same time because you get the effect of the musicality of the words by listening, but the actual words from reading. This chapter is also at 4:00, which is the appointed time for the rendezvous between Blazes and Molly. And so Bloom spends a lot of time trying to avoid thinking about it. So thinking about it. And it's also interspersed with a lot of symbolism about what is happening between Blazes and Molly. It's very clear in the text what they're doing, even if, those words are never used. And then that chapter ends with a bit of Bloom's physicality again, where he just wanders off down the street farting. Just to bring down the tone. So that's where I am up to. Am I enjoying it? I don't think so. I've enjoyed parts of it, and reflecting on it as a whole is interesting, but the actual process of reading and listening, I'm not enjoying at all. And some parts that are really hard, like that musical chapter where I had to stop what I was doing and sit down and read the book, I resented. Is that too strong a word? I don't think so, because there's things that I want to be doing while I'm listening. And to be fair, most of the things that I'm doing while I'm listening are tasks that don't require much attention, so that I can focus on the book, which is not always what I want from an audiobook, but this one definitely requires attention. This past chapter with the musicality, I did have to stop halfway and just take a break because it was just a lot. And your mileage will vary because we're all very different readers. Even though the chapters are getting longer, there's fewer of them left, which makes it feel more achievable, even though the last chapter I think is over 2 hours in one go, which is the kind of thing that makes me grateful for listening to it rather than reading it, because I will listen to that all on one day probably, but reading would take a long time and break it up and possibly disturb the narrative flow there. I am on my way out the door. That's why I'm wearing a big jacket. Not that I wear big coats in the house. This heating situation isn't that dire yet. I need to catch you up on Ulysses. It's been seconds since we last spoke on your end, but on my end it's been weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't even know. I filmed an update this time last week, and the footage was bad and the sound was worse, and so I've scrapped it, and now I have to paraphrase what I said then, which boils down to I freaking hate Ulysses. I hate it so much. I hate James Joyce. It's a bunch of pretentious wank and I'm not having fun. I feel like I have to explain myself here. I'm in two minds. I'm frustrated with Ulysses because it is so full of pretentious wank, but that's the point. That's how it's written. That's what Joyce was aiming for, was to experiment with the form and the style and not the content, not the plot. In that respect, I can see why this book has been studied for a century at this point. It's a clever book doing clever things with style, new things with the format, which is the hallmark of modernism. So in that respect, it's a perfectly cromulent book. I am hating it because it makes the story more difficult to get to. And then I second guess myself and I think, is the story not fun, or am I not putting in the work to understand the story? Is it a me problem and I'm just not trying hard enough? Or is it a book problem which is trying too hard, so hard to be clever that it's getting in the way of an enjoyment? And I think it's both. I think it is me not putting in the work. And I think it's the book making it hard, deliberately hard, which is the point of the book. I can't fault the book for not doing the thing I want the book to do when that is not the point of the book. I don't have it with me because it's upstairs, but the companion book is so useful in understanding not just what's going on. Like, I'm getting the gist of what's going on, but what's going on with the style and what Joyce is trying to achieve here with the style, if we can gauge what he was trying to achieve, what is actually being achieved by playing with the format. And that has helped me understand what I'm not enjoying. There was a chapter, I don't know if we talked about it already, a chapter set in a bar, which is very musical in that it's the form of the chapter is built like a musical, I can't remember what, in some musical style. And so it's about fitting the story into that format. All the chapters from then on are different explorations and experiments of style. But from that bar chapter, that's when it started to get really tedious for me. And the companion book said that's where Joyce gives up on having a straightforward narrative and starts really leaning into this form experiment. So it was nice to have the book explain to me why I wasn't enjoying what I was enduring. I will say enduring. It's been really hard, especially because any other book I would DNF. But, you know, we're here doing the reading vlog and I really do want to say that I have read Ulysses. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. That's me paraphrasing what I said last week is I'm not having fun. I am persevering. Without the context of the companion book and the Audrey app, I would be lost and hating life. They're really helpful. And if you are going to embark on Ulysses, I would definitely recommend either just letting it wash over you, which was what was recommended to me, just let it wash over you. But having the context stuff is helping me understand what Joyce is trying to achieve in this story, pick up on things that I missed, because the first time you read something, you're always going to miss those foreshadowing moments and the callbacks and stuff like that. Or at least I do, the callbacks and stuff like that, because there's just so much to take in all at once. There's a lot of characters here. Plus the playing with the style makes the imparting of the story more difficult. So highly recommend having all of that. Having said that, in the past week, I've made a concerted effort to try and catch up. I think 2 chapters behind. I'm on the second last chapter, so I think the read along dates have finished. Today is the 23rd of July. And I'm not that far behind, although the app says I still have like 7 hours to go. That hurts. The next chapter, the last chapter, is an entirely different POV. It's Molly, Bloom's wife, and when you read it, there's no punctuation whatsoever, famously. Reading that, I think, will be good because it will just be one continuous monologue, essentially. Stream of consciousness, which again is a hallmark of modernism. So today I've got an appointment to get to, that's why I'm dressed. And then I need to tackle some cleaning on this house. And cleaning means audiobook, so that's today's plan. But yeah, I have struggled a lot with this. I have hated it. I've put it down for a week and a half at a time. And I've not wanted to record any updates because even the thought of Ulysses made me angry. Definitely, if you were on the fence about Ulysses, hopefully this has tipped you over with my rave review. In terms of the story, it is interesting. A lot of the things that are famous in this story, including the chapter that got Ulysses banned in America, which is public masturbation on the beach, were interesting. The guide from Sophie Corsa in the Audrey app says that that is the chapter that got the book banned because it is a readable chapter. It's not hidden away in illusion and metaphor. It's quite explicit what is happening. Just outs Bloom as a perv. That's really interesting to have a main character who is so freaking unlikable. I really don't like him. And that's very likely the point, is he's just a guy, a regular guy, having a textual affair via letters with someone he hasn't met. And his missus is having an affair, and his daughter's moved out of home. She's just turned 15 and she's about to embark on an affair. And it's all very just banal and mundane and people doing people things. And nothing extraordinary is happening. And that is the point. The point is the experimental form rather than what Bloom is doing in any one day. And trying to shoehorn it into the framework of the Odyssey, where Bloom is Odysseus, who is not a hero by any stretch. He's a dickhead. That's my deep and meaningful reflections on Ulysses. What it has done is it's inspired me to go back and read the Odyssey and maybe the Iliad. The Iliad's a bit boring. There are the new translations by Emily Wilson, I want to say. Gonna buy those two together, but also Stephen Fry's retellings are quite approachable. If you're interested in what is happening in Greek myth, it's the foundation of our literary culture, but I don't know what's happening. They're a great place to go as well. I listened to those because Stephen Fry is the most excellent narrator that I've come across. Would recommend those if you want to explore further the Odyssey and the Iliad. It's feeling like exercise to me, where it is so hard in the moment and you want to die and you never want to do this again. And then on reflection, it was okay. You endured it. It was fine. And you'd probably go back and do it again. That is how I'm feeling. On the other hand, my non-audiobook reading has been comfort reading because I've just needed something chill to contrast with how hard Ulysses is. And it's deliberately hard, as I said. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that I could put in more effort to understand it. I could spend an entire career studying this. And I have no interest in doing that. It will get done. It will finally be done at some point. I hope. I hope. Because I've got buddy reads planned after this and people are waiting on me to like chop, chop, chop. So it needs to be done. Probably I will check in when it's done and I'll be jubilant. How do you say that word? I mean, if by this end of the book you weren't aware that this is a very bodily focused kind of person, Leopold Bloom, we're just having a description of the length and height of a urine stream and how when he was in high school he could fly longer and higher than all the others. If that's not such a boy-focused thing, I don't even know what. There's a lot of noise going on around me, which with noise-cancelling earphones is not so bad, but I'm hoping you can hear me. This chapter that I'm up to, let me find it in the actual physical version. It's set in the form of question and answer, and the further I get through it, the more it feels like talking to a chat GPT. You can see it's broken up into paragraphs here, and that's the question and answer. So there is things like, did the man reappear elsewhere? Then an answer. What did Bloom do? than an answer. It just felt like ChatGPT prompts, which I guess is a very modern take on a very old text. But that struck me as interesting. Also, it's tedious. It's so tedious to listen to. The stuff with the weeing and the Stephen and Bloom were weeing together, and like the text was comparing the height and the length and the power of the stream and differences because Bloom is a Jew. Is it necessary? Probably no.
I'm on the last chapter, and this book might actually finish. There's 2 hours and 23 minutes to go, and it is 8 sentences from Molly Bloom. Also, there was a content warning for sex, which literally not a surprise. Good morning. It is first thing Sunday morning, and I finished Ulysses last thing Saturday night, and I am done. I am so done with this book. In fact, I did my usual thing where I post the cover of the book I've just finished on my social media. And on Mastodon, somebody replied and said, "Oh, well done. I've heard this was a really hard book." And I replied, what did I say? Something like I hated every second of it. Which is not true. You guys know that's not true. But the vast majority of it I did not enjoy. But that last chapter, Molly's chapter, is so good. It is the best part of the whole book. It's like eating your entire dinner, and the mashed potato at the end is creamy and cheesy and delicious and still warm, and it's chef kiss. So all the feels that I have about Ulysses now are going to be tempered by how much I loved Molly's chapter right at the end, which is unfair and also very clever of Joyce. I feel like I've been personally targeted in this instance. So I need to finish reading the final chapters in the Reading Ulysses companion book and then come back to you with some final thoughts. But it was actually, it was good in the end. And that's the annoying part. I'm so pleased to say that I have done it. Okay, let's wrap up my thoughts on Ulysses by James Joyce on the Audrey app. I want to, before I go into my thoughts, if I can remember the way that I wanted to structure them, I want to read you verbatim. Right at the end, it's about how Joyce is still being received 100 years after publication. And it starts out talking about the scandal that it was on publication. The book appeared as something monstrous, monstrous in its sheer bulk, monstrous in its sexual frankness, monstrous in its complexity and alleged unreadability. In causing such a shock, in creating such a stir, Ulysses was playing its part in a central aspect of modernism, the shock of the new, as it has been well called, the wholly unexpected arrival of a rough beast, radically different from the literature that had preceded it and, on the face of it, radically different from any preceding literature. Was it literature at all? Goes on to say, today when the work has classic status, we are no longer, of course, shocked by these things, but something is also lost in our tamed acceptance of, say, all of Molly's fantasies. I want to speak to that because that has come up a few times in introductory essays I've read to, not classics, but classic science fiction, and the way that something that is so radical and modern and new and different and thought-provoking and shocking becomes normalized over time when we accept the cultural change that that book has imparted on all of literature, all of the genre. So that's something that I always have to keep in front of mind when I'm thinking about older works. What was the context of the reception of the book, not just the context of the creation of the book. And Ulysses has a reputation for being hard, and of course we know that it was banned in places on publication, so there must be something about it that caused it to be banned. But I don't think I was ever shocked by the contents. Is that because it's 100 years later and those things just aren't shock value anymore? And I think I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised. And the things that surprised me are the things that probably caused it to be banned, like Bloom masturbating in public on the beach. Not the fact that that happened, but the fact that it was in print. Or Molly at the end, who absolutely redeemed the book for me.
Molly at the end is a pure stream of consciousness. There's no punctuation. It's just thoughts, and they're meandering thoughts like a person would have. And she's thinking about her husband, Bloom, and she's thinking about her lover, Boylan, and previous lovers that she's had. And in the middle of this, she gets her period, and then she's like, oh, I have to get up and deal with my period. That surprised me. Not that she's thinking about sex or she's thinking about her lovers or the events of the day or the contradictory thoughts she's having about all those things, but that in the middle of it, she gets a period. And the fact that is in print really surprised me in a good way. I'm low-key mad that Penelope chapter right at the end just reframed the entire book for me and kind of made it feel like it was worth my time and rage and boredom and all of the things. And it's also the Molly chapter at the end is the closest that I could see as an analogue to the Odyssey, because Molly is Penelope and Penelope is Odysseus's wife, and she's at home for all the years that Odysseus is on his Odyssey, fighting in the war and then trying to get home again. And the whole time she's been fending off suitors who've come to her court to marry her because they assume Odysseus is dead. Penelope deals with this situation by weaving a death shroud for her father-in-law, and she says, I can't get married to anyone else until I finish the shroud. And so she weaves it by day, holding court, and then at night she unpicks it all. And that's what Molly has done with this book. The whole book has been woven over the course of the day, and then Molly, through her thoughts, her perspective on events, her perspective on past events and people, just kind of unpicks all the things that you thought you knew about the day, and you have to rework them again in your brain, but also these characters will have to rework it again the next day because it's a cycle of days and the book is set over a day. Like I said, I'm mad that she redeemed the whole thing for me, put in the effort, and I got the reward. Obviously, I would not have even attempted this without the Audrey app, and I'm so pleased that I was gifted a copy for review because the obligation to review it made me stick with it. Otherwise, I probably would have DNF'd in the really hard parts. And again, this, like the context in the app from Sophie Corsair is amazing, and I recommend that. This really helped me put it in perspective. Things like those chapters with interminable lists that just went on and they were so boring. Or the catechism chapter, like the call and response one right near the end. Put it in the context for me. This put it in the context for me of that it's not a novel, it's an epic. And in an epic, that sort of thing is totally allowed and expected. In a novel, it's tedious. But Joyce didn't claim to be writing a novel, he claimed to be rewriting an epic. Stuff like that just really contextualized it. That's exactly what it's doing. Contextualized it for me, helped me understand what was going on. I will never read this book again. Never ever. I've ticked it off. I've said I've done it. That's what I wanted. But I do have over here Dubliners. And I picked up this week actually from a secondhand bookstore a portrait of an artist as a young man. And these are both set in the same Dublin cinematic universe. They have crossover characters, they're set in Dublin, and so I think I will read these. Portrait of the artist as a young man is Stephen Dedalus, but Stephen Dedalus is really James Joyce. Stephen Dedalus is Joyce in Ulysses as well. And then Dubliners has characters in here who you see in passing in Ulysses. So it's all part of the same storytelling. So it would be interesting to pick these ones up as well. Dubliners is on the Audrey app, and so that might be the way that I do it. Ultimately, my thoughts together is if you are interested in Ulysses and it seems daunting, give the Audrey version a go because, like I said, I think I probably said at the beginning, that was 6 weeks ago. It was a long time. I've read their stuff before on the app and it was great. I'm currently reading something now that's got the context in it and I just find it really useful. Also, the one that I'm reading now, this version with this narrator, you can't find it anywhere else. And this was the best one I sampled. So I went back, I gave Audrey my money, and I'm happy to do so. Let me know, have you attempted Ulysses? Do you want to attempt Ulysses? Do you think that it's one of those things that don't need to be on a bucket list and that you don't need to think about ever? Now I have to go and edit this epic journey and see if any of what I said made sense. Or it could be like modernism, like Joyce. Different episodes with different styles and different themes, all in potentially a cohesive narrative, but that's not what we're aiming for. Maybe that's what I've got out of Ulysses. Bye.